Welcome to Mystical Messages. I am Hilary Harley, your podcast host. I am a soul guide and astrologer. Mystical Messages is your podcast gateway to discover and learn about the realm beyond the veil, including all things intuitive, metaphysical, and the healing arts. To learn more about my work or to book a session with me, please visit hilaryharley.com. If you would like to read my monthly forecast, you may find the full written transcript for all astrology episodes on my website. That way, if you hear something and want to re-listen to a forecast or to check a date of a cosmic event, you may find it on the written monthly forecast on hilaryharley.com. Today, we are discussing the journey of personal and spiritual development. And I am so delighted to have my very special guest, Kerrin Smith, here to help me understand more about this topic and her journey. Kerrin is spelled Kerrin, Kerrin Smith, and she is the art director and photographer and founder of Cool and Thoughtful magazine. You may find her on Instagram at by Cool and Thoughtful and on her website, coolandthoughtful.com. Welcome, Kerrin. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Hilary. It is a joy to be here.
So you are a person that I look up to, and I am very honored to have you here. And it is not often that a chronologically older person looks at a person 30 years younger and says, wow, what can I learn from this young woman?
Mm.
And I really want to dive into your journey, how you came to be an art director, a photographer, and the founder of Cool and Thoughtful, what you are learning about personal development and why you were called to your journey of personal and spiritual development.
That's very kind of you, Hilary. And I can't help but think of an expression that might sound a little funny, but I think really captures the essence of the relationship that you and I have, which is source, sourcing, source. So, what that means is that there is a source of power, of mentorship, of guidance, of coaching that provides that guidance to someone else. So, your mentorship, your guidance to me. And then what I do with that then feeds back to you in terms of your own inspiration and power. So source, sourcing, source. It's kind of this beautiful loop. And, that's one of the things that my dad taught me is that the way to be powerful is you pay attention to your sources of power and you fulfill their intentions. And that gives you more power. So it's this very dynamic way of understanding that everyone wins. So with that, I acknowledge you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is truly a beautiful infinity loop
Mhm.
that continuously feeds light, which is truly magic. So
Yes.
I have to say, just for my audience, I am about to be 60. You are my daughters. I have two daughters, and we talked about this a bit before we jumped on this morning, this afternoon, and to record this. And you're millennials, and why this millennial generation is so wise, and you are part of this wisdom. And it's like my cohort that were born in the 60s and 70s have given birth to this army of baby Yodas
Mm.
and that are now not babies anymore. I mean, they're full grown Yodas. So there are lots of different ways we can dive into this.
Sure.
And I'll take your lead on that.
Sure. So I was reflecting a bit on how does one come to a practice of personal and spiritual development? And I think that practice can really range from, elements of their day that are ritualized to really taking this on as a lifestyle. You think about that as a spectrum. Like on one end of the spectrum, you might have like a daily meditation practice for 10 minutes, and that's great. And that is your expression. On the other end, it's how can I design every element of my life to be some expression of personal and spiritual development? Admittedly, I am on the far end of the spectrum. So ruthlessly trying to design every element of my life like that. And the question is why
Mm-hmm.
and how? And I think that those questions, regardless of which end of the spectrum one might find themselves on, are very relevant. And so, um, the best answer I have is that someone might come to or be called to a practice of personal or spiritual development quite simply because they think something else is possible.
Mm-hmm.
They see something else as possible, or they want something else for themselves, for their life, for the world. Like there's got to be something else.
Mm-hmm. Something's missing, maybe.
Maybe, although I think it's more powerful to see a possibility and drive towards that rather than react against something that's wrong. Not
Mm-hmm.
semantic, it's a difference
Right.
in sense.
Right.
But I think that one might not always understand it that way. It might be like, wow, this really isn't working. Like, there's got to be something else.
Right.
Or like I want to be more peaceful, or like I'm really not happy in like this relationship or this job, or like, man, I am so anxious. Like, please let there be something else.
Mm-hmm.
All the way up to, wow, there's some things in the world that I really don't think are working. Like, there's got to be something else possible. I think there are many different ways that one could come to this. And I think similarly, to be so bold as to speak for my generation, I have noticed there is a real questing for a sense of purpose and a
Mm-hmm.
sense of meaning. And I think that comes from many places. And I think one of the places that comes from is that the traditional sources that people would find that don't necessarily exist with the same like robust presence that they did a generation ago. Things
Right.
like family structures, different community structures, like the world is just very different. How people organize is very different. How people are relating is very different. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that, there are some gaps that's created around like, what is my life for, or, really wanting to be up to something. But I think that's also just a human impulse too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think
There
that's
has
just,
to be something richer.
yeah, and feel like you're up to something,
Mm-hmm.
and like feel like your life is for something, even if it doesn't occur to you. I think that's just a very natural part of the human experience. And so those are some thoughts about how one might come to a practice of personal development, spiritual development. I feel rather spoiled in that I was born to parents that were very committed to personal and spiritual development. I grew up in a context and environments that were all about that. And that is like such a blessing in my life. And I have friends equally committed to this kind of path that didn't grow up in that context. And, for them, it came from a stroke of insight or just like kind of a nagging thought that they paid attention to, or there was something that came their way, a book, a teaching, an idea that really resonated, and like they followed that, or
Mm-hmm.
they went through a really hard time and like, wow, I'm in awe of them around somewhere, somehow they found it in themselves to find whatever resources and sensibilities that they then pulled their way to then start on a path of personal development. I think, you know, I kind of feel like I had it easy in that regard. Um,
Yes. I mean, I do not know your father, and I've only met your mother virtually. And she is truly a remarkable human being. Kerrin's mom is an amazing human being as a grief counselor, but many other job descriptors, I would say. Um, but that can also, I can say astrologically, we do choose our parents, but that could be, that could have worked in the opposite direction where you were like, okay, I hear you, but I'm going to be a stock uh, market investor, a venture capitalist on Wall Street, and want nothing to do with the spiritual realm. And, there are lots of different ways these patterns can work. But you clearly chose your parents
oh
with
yes.
the
Oh yes. I know this very deeply.
yeah, to learn from the masters from the get-go.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
do take your point very seriously about there are people that come in. I know a lot of the guests that I've had on this show, um, the older generation, especially, where it either wasn't available, spiritual, what are you becoming an artist for? Or, you know, why would you pursue an eat, pray, love kind of lifestyle when you need to put food on the table and pay your bills? And that is what continuously strikes me about the younger cohort, is that there is this innate recognition that there is something more to pursue.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. And I think to just touch on one of the modalities that is quite foundational for me is energy work with a guru, having, a line of sight, if you can even call it that, into how my soul relates to my parents and
Mm-hmm.
what you said, Hilary, around, we choose our parents. I'm very clear how and why I chose my parents. And
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, their gifts and their influence is really foundational for me in terms of how I live and the kind of difference that I'm committed to making. So I would offer two main junctures in my journey. I would say the first was when I actually like woke up to a practice and a life of personal development. And the second is when I looked at the modalities that I was using and thought there has to be something more than what I've been using, which catapulted me into a whole exploration of the subconscious mind. So the first one was yes, I grew up in a home all oriented around learning, self awareness, personal development, making a difference, just kind of the water I was in, but I didn't have my own practice of that.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 19 in 2011, I did a 3-day course called the Landmark Forum,
Mm-hmm.
which is the single most impactful experience I've ever had. It
Wow.
was absolutely profound for me.
That's very young to do landmark.
Yes,
Were
it
you,
didn't.
were you like the youngest enrolled?
Well, my brother actually beat me because after I did it, he did it and he was maybe 14 or 15 at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think what was so extraordinary about that work was there are a couple of things that happened in the Landmark Forum, which is for me, the modality of Landmark, that's like an all-time top 3 practice for me. And I've
Mm-hmm.
I've really like built my life on that foundation and find that the technology of Landmark, which is rooted in ontology, the study and creation of being, I find that I only get more skilled and dexterous with that as I add other modalities to my toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
So, what happened for me in that course is one, fulfilled the intention of the course, which is you complete the past. So rather than a therapy, which can be so helpful and have so much value for many, rather than like looking and examining the things that are in one's backpack, like this happened when I was 6, this happened when I was 8, my first breakup here, you actually take off the backpack. So that's a metaphor for completing the past. And with that freedom, there's the opportunity to then create something else for your life. And you get the distinctions and the tools in the course to create that something else. And, you know, for me, that was extraordinary. And how you create that something else is the technology gives you access into your blind spots. So the things that you don't know and you don't know that you don't know.
Which is huge.
Huge, huge. And I reach for that every single day.
Wow.
I went quite deep in the work. I've participated consistently ever since. I actually trained to be a program leader there. And there's just so much of that work that is just baked into how I create life and how I live and how I strive to be with others. So I did that at 19. And as I started that work, and really engaging more deeply with it, the other thing that became very clear for me in that process is like, it's not like, is my life is for making a difference. Very clear. And, there's a kind of stroke of grace that gets expressed through cool and thoughtful, which is I have this bizarre, native to me, but communicable to others belief that we can use the power of aesthetics and fashion and brands and things that look and feel just so cool. And we can use that magnetism to express ways of being and acting and interacting with others in the world that actually make a difference. And, this whole idea of like, you see a super cool at the time fashion blogger, right? Or like a really cool fashion girl outside of Fashion Week, but what comes out of her mouth makes a difference. Like that was the originating seed for what now gets expressed in my work as an art director who uses photography and brand design and graphic design to actually bring these concepts to life in a way that feels really cool. And, that's what the magazine is all about. And, that idea came to me, through the early days of my life after Landmark. So that was sort of the first major inflection point. And, in that first chapter, I just was so fascinated with what does it mean to live skillfully as a human being? Because being a human being is no joke. Not sure if you've noticed, but like it's not exactly a walk in the park. If you're wondering, just ask yourself how you woke up this morning. And anybody who woke up being like, I feel great, not anxious, love it. Please, let's talk because you've got something going on.
Right. Bottle it and sell it.
Yes, literally.
Yeah. No, that's so true.
And so, I think that first chapter was very much sort of 2011 through I'd say 2013, or excuse me, 2023, really. Was like how to live skillfully with the human experience. Like, how can we move beyond believing what we think to actually like have some agency over our thoughts and like get present and choose which thoughts we'd like to have and choose how we want to be in the world. Along the way, I was introduced to my guru, Sai Ma, who my favorite like one-liner about my family is, oh yeah, dad did the journey of profound healing with Sai Ma, and then mom did the journey of profound healing with Sai Ma. Oh yeah, no, they're divorced. They got divorced years ago. No, it's great. They're friends. It's fine. And then for my 24th birthday or whatever it was, I got to do the journey of profound healing with Sai Ma. That's my favorite anecdote. And so I think within that chapter, I came to discover that there is a kind of like energy and consciousness out there, capital OT, right? Like out there. And I could feel it sometimes I started meditating daily after the journey of profound healing. So that was like 2015. Started meditating. That opened the door to starting to read some Pema Chodron, which actually gave me a bit of context for the thoughts that I was working so hard to transform. Like, oh, having thoughts that are frightening is a normal part of the human experience.
Right.
You can actually just let them be. You can start practicing just letting them run for 90 seconds and see if you can just let them run their biological course rather than freaking out at your first thought. So
And
there was
trying to control them.
totally, totally. So I
Yeah.
think, in this, like, how that's all part of like how to live skillfully with the human experience. And so, the parallel theme with this is having this dream and this vision around cool and thoughtful. And really this thesis of I believe that things that look and feel really cool,
Mm-hmm.
fashion, design, brand, photography, art, music, like that resonates with people. That
Mm-hmm.
resonates with the human spirit. Like, how can we use that resonance to promote consciousness, essentially? And I didn't have a good answer. And it wasn't for lack of trying.
Mm-hmm.
Tried everything from running a membership program to designing a mindfulness workshop, leading that mindfulness workshop for myself, leading that mindfulness workshop for fashion brands, opening a brick and mortar store in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
writing a magazine, like really trying to find like this is my life's work, like this is my calling, like how will this get expressed and how can I express this? And so this leads us to the second inflection point, which was the top of 2023. So we're now 12 years after first doing the Landmark Forum and about 11 years into the journey of cool and thoughtful. And somewhere early in the year, every year around New Year's, I go on a K retreat, which means that I take the days between Christmas and New Year's and really just check out, go inside,
Mm-hmm.
do whatever there is for me to do around that. Probably in that time. And I found myself asking the question, all right, Kay, you fundamentally had the same dream for 10 years. Are you serious about this or not? Like, you're not getting any younger, which sounds funny to say at 30, right? Like, I was in the nail salon the other day and these girls are like, yeah, no, I'm 24. I mean, when I'm 30, I look over, I'm like, oh, honey.
Yeah.
So I recognize that it might sound like that, but I think, you know, if you're blessed enough to have the clarity around what your life is for, which I did, even if I didn't recognize it at the time, that came to me very early,
Mm-hmm.
very early. I was like 20, 21.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing Landmark at 19, you're way ahead of the curve. I mean, I'm sure you were looking around at your fellow students in Landmark, and there were not a whole lot of 19-year-olds and people under 25. So you're starting from a very early, it's like, Olympic athlete that's training when they're 5, and you're doing this work at a very early age.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you. And I feel like that's an appropriate context that like I was blessed enough to know at 21 that like how I was going to express my like I knew how there was for me to express my purpose vis-a-vis cool and thoughtful and what I have described to you. Even if I didn't recognize that at the time, I knew it deep down. And so, to then fast forward 10 years and be like, all right, I still haven't done it. Like it's still not sticking in terms of how I want to be living my life, how I want to be making a difference. Like,
Right.
what's going on? Like,
Right.
and so
Was it a fruits of your labor type of thing? Like, I'm not seeing the results that I expected.
it was like I I knew that like how I wanted whatever the clarity of form was around Cool and Thoughtful, like what I was doing as the founder of that, like there's a way that I wanted it to be, and I am committed that it is my whole life. And like it's
Mm-hmm.
expression, it's what's natural for me. It's the most powerful way that I can make a difference. It's like my joy, and it's this
Mm-hmm.
vision that I have for what's possible for people, for art, like through art, rather, it's not for art, it's through art, like
Right.
through fashion, through
Right.
aesthetic. I took the case, Hilary, that I did not have the skills to fulfill on this purpose or dream yet. Otherwise, I would have already done it. And when
Mm-hmm.
I say skills, I do not mean hard skills of like branding or InDesign,
Right.
in the skills of personal and spiritual development. And so I really took the case, even though it wasn't, I didn't language it to myself like this at the time. Looking back, this is how I was being and how I was operating. I don't have what I need in my toolbox in order to fulfill on this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found myself seeking out other modalities. And I found myself meeting people who were teachers and stewards of other modalities. So, some examples, I'd say it really started with discovering the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered his work through a woman who is extraordinary and has become a dear friend of mine, Steph Flockhart. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Shameless plug, you can read about her in Cool and Thoughtful issue number 3. And what Steph does is she blends practices of the subconscious mind, so things like the work of Dr. Joe, meditations, affirmations, EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique, with Chinese medicine and beauty practices.
Wow.
People fundamentally transform how they relate to beauty, how they relate to their own beauty, and it manifests physically. Like Steph is extraordinary. And so, and everything she does feels like fashion. Like her aesthetic, like she and I are sort of kindred spirits around how can we use a high fashion aesthetic to express ways of being and express a kind of consciousness that will make a difference for people. And so I
Like
discovered
honey to fly, honey drawing, it's the aesthetic that draws you in. And then it's like, ooh, what's underneath this?
exactly that you just articulated like the essence of Cool and Thoughtful and like what I really burned for. So um it was through Steph's work that I discovered the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza. It was at this time I was living in Miami Beach and had had a long time yoga practice, but I found that where I was just in my personal development, I started going to yoga every day. And so there was something that was happening in my brain first thing in the morning around alpha brain states every morning, every day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that snowballed as I started to meet other people. So, in coming to know Steph, I discovered EFT tapping, which is this technique just phenomenal, where you're tapping along acupuncture points in Chinese medicine and releasing subconscious beliefs. There's a YouTube channel and a guy named Brad Yates, Tap with Brad. Incredible. So that was sort of another small window into, okay, what are the subconscious beliefs that I might be believing that are holding me back? I met another extraordinary human in Miami Beach who's one of my best friends. I talk to him almost every day. His name is Patrick Bradford, and he is the most incredible example of living life in alignment with oneself. And
Wow.
modalities that he has, everything around like the nuances of nutrition to really support one's individual system, to like his whole life is flow. Like he's a master of living in flow with himself. And so conversations with him in conjunction with Dr. Joe, I came to discover human design as a modality.
Mm-hmm.
And it was through human design that I discovered, wow, how I've trained myself to make decisions is actually the opposite of what this modality is saying is natural for me. So, what I mean by that is my go to way of making things happen prior to discovering human design in summer of 2023 was set a really clear picture and intention of what I want to create and then go like hell to make it happen. Don't
Mm-hmm.
stop.
Right.
That can be very effective in certain circumstances and
Mm-hmm.
or for certain people.
Correct.
That was kind of my only mode. And in human design, the app that has been so supportive for me, and a combination of Patrick and Steph and another friend of mine in Miami, Sean Patrick, who's another teacher there, the three of them really introduced me to this. The human design app with a woman, Jenna Zoe, is, I just think it's phenomenal. And so in my design, actually, I'm a generator, sacral authority, 4-1 responding. So what that means is that my way of making decisions and how I make things happen in life is actually to be scanning the environment, to almost have like a surround sound observation that's responding, like being very attuned to what's going on around me. And then if an idea or a concept or an action resonates with me, like in my gut, so a sacral authority, gut, act on it decisively.
Mm-hmm.
This is literally the opposite of how I had conditioned and trained myself to operate. Like my singular mode was your thoughts, your feelings, irrelevant. What you say you're committed to is what you're committed to. So don't let anything stop you and go make it happen.
Yep. Which is so common. I
Mm.
mean, we know that this is common. It's like, okay, this is the goal, whether it's our own personal goal or one that society imprints on us, you need to become this. So that is very powerful when that happens.
And what's powerful about it, Hilary, is listen, everyone has their own unique way of making decisions and taking action that works for them. What I say and how I relate to this for myself is like having that mode that, like, here's my intention, ignore all thoughts, feelings, go make it happen. Like, it wasn't getting me the results
Mm-hmm.
in my life. And so, you know, it's it's more like there have got to be other ways of making decisions and like moving through life. So, you know, I'll speak in a moment to how the modality of Kabbalah has been an absolutely extraordinary bridge for me between this ethos and sensibility of like, don't stop, go at it, like,
Mm-hmm.
be unreasonable, like, make it happen. And this being very linear and how I'm presenting this with this, the world of this subconscious mind and making choices in a way that is really led by intuition and feeling. So Kabbalah has been a way for me to bridge the two that's in a way that's really worked for me. I'll speak to that in a moment, but I think to just flesh out and transition a bit, this second chapter, all through 2023 and really through that year was actually developing these other modalities. When I read my human design profile and when my friend Sean interpreted it for me and sketched out that other way of making decisions that is more suitable for my design within human design around scanning and then responding and listening to my gut, I remember in the days afterwards, I remember being on my bike, biking to yoga in the morning, thinking about that modality, trying to imagine what it would be like to do that, actually trying to use it for whatever I was thinking about, and feeling like, wow, I can't even imagine what it's like to make decisions in this way, let alone do it. And
Mm-hmm.
allegedly, this is how I'm supposed to be making decisions. Holy smokes.
Mm-hmm.
And so needless to say, I took it on and I continue to practice that.
So my question here is, did that feel like it must have resonated that I need to be shifting how I make decisions from the intuitive to then instrument, the implementing them through action rather than driving whole hog. So, because some people would be like, well, that's just not going to be how I do it. And I mean, it must have really pinged with you.
It did, because remember, I took the case. I'm like, my life is not working how I'd like it to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a dream and a vision and a commitment that I've had for a long time, and it's not manifesting how I'd like for it to manifest.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of why it resonated was, we hear about the concept of beginner's mind. There is something so powerful when it's really hard to do, but when you're not getting the results you're looking for in your life, considering how you're doing it is not working, and throwing out the old playbook and considering maybe there's another way. And, this could be everything. I was working kind of at a macro level, but, even if like there are results in your fitness that you can get,
Right, right.
like,
It could be in any aspect of the life. But what I'm hearing is the willingness. And that's what really is striking is your willingness. And anybody who wants to see results has to um, come to it with as an invitation, not as a mandate. I mean, some people can come to it as a mandate, but that's more of a crisis point rather than like I've lost my job, everything's gone out the window, but you're coming to this not at a crisis point, but seeing as a juncture saying, I'm not seeing the results. So what do I need to do differently? And that takes a tremendous amount of inner authority and willingness to say, it's really being the CEO of your life and recognizing there must be other avenues, and the follow through is what is so mind blowing to me, because so many people can have the awareness but then not be willing to do the work that you're doing to follow through.
thank you. Thank you for the acknowledgement. And what I will say is that um, it's all a function of the context. So, what I mean by that is, you know, even if my circumstances were, say, not that I had just lost my job or, had, God forbid, received a terrible diagnosis or, had some like very like challenging circumstances that was going on, one can still relate to personal development in the same way, regardless of the circumstances. So you can relate to personal development as like there's got to be something else, or like there's an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for power here. And something I talk a lot about with my best friend Holly is how to relate to this work of personal and spiritual development. Because if you are relating to it like there's something wrong that you need to fix, or like what's wrong with me, or what's wrong with my life, or when am I going to make it, or like when am I going to get there, why haven't I gotten it yet, like if you
Mm-hmm.
have that kind of conversation and like, all right, I'm going to go do the work, like that's a fundamentally disempowering conversation. And there's something instead around, okay, my dad said to me once, like, it's a mountain with no top. Like, personal and spiritual development, it's a mountain with no top. You're never going to make it. There's nowhere to get to. That's not to say you can't have breakthroughs and progress and
And
milestones
goals.
and
Right.
goals. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But how I choose to relate to all of this is as my self expression,
Mm-hmm.
and that really empowers me. So, you know, living a life where I'm doing everything I possibly can to become more conscious and like translate that into actions and conversations. Like that is how I express myself. And that's very empowering. And, I would invite others to try on personal development as a self-expression. Like it's a way that you can sort of be with yourself and with life and with others, or even just like get jazzed about trying to be better rather
Mm-hmm.
than like what's wrong with me. Like
Right.
get jazzed about trying to be better, because I think the core thesis in all of this, and this is also a core principle in everything I do with Cool and Thoughtful, and the people you'll read about in the magazine, is get right with yourself so that you can shine your light in the world. And
That's beautiful.
it's so true though,
Mm-hmm.
it's true in that you can't, like, you will, the difference you can make with others and in life will only go so far if you're not right with yourself. And similarly, you know, being right with yourself and doing all this work, whatever it looks like for you, to be just that much more aware, that much better, that much more powerful in your life. Like, yes, so great to create more peace and consciousness for yourself. And that's what enables you to go be great with other people.
Mm-hmm. And it's the integrity and the honesty that you take those steps with, because the quest for results in and of themselves is the end goal, or power and self-empowerment. It has to be because you're recognizing something is out of sync, out of alignment, dishonest, perhaps, lacks integrity within yourself. So, my guest is the inimitable Kerrin Smith. She is art director, photographer, and founder of Cool and Thoughtful magazine. You can find her on Instagram by Cool and Thoughtful, and also her website, coolandthoughtful.com. So you talked about 2023 as another inflection point. What happened there for you?
So the watershed moment for me is that one of the things I was finding is that the more momentum I was building and the more mastery I was starting to practice, not even mastery, the more like skill I was starting to
Right,
practice
right, right. It's like
with
building a muscle at a gym.
exactly with these other modalities in the subconscious mind. Um, at the time I was living in Miami, and it was becoming clearer and clearer that that context wasn't a match for the kind of life I was looking to create vis-a-vis Cool and Thoughtful.
Mm-hmm,
Uh, I moved to Miami thinking that that was where I was going to build the next chapter of my life. And as I was getting clearer and clearer about my goals and practicing this, it was clear that actually Miami wasn't the right place for me to be.
mm-hmm,
That felt very confusing to me at the time, because inside the linear mind, it's like, what's your problem? It's gorgeous. You've got a great apartment. Like it's Miami. It's the beach. Like
mm-hmm,
what else do you want? And getting clearer and clearer that like actually those circumstances are just not a fit.
mm-hmm,
And so the watershed moment, Hillary, was actually moving back to New York. I moved back to New York at the end of August 2023. And this was the first major expression of that other way of making decisions. And it was also my first experience of what it is, or rather, it was my first experience of the power that is possible when you live in alignment with yourself. So let
mm-hmm.
me piece that apart, because
Yeah.
that is really the theme of my life right now, and also the theme of what I want to be bringing to the world next.
Mm-hmm,
So, what I mean by that is alignment with yourself is knowing what's right for you and being very honest with yourself about that. It's very simple. It's very hard for many.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very hard for me because the simplicity of it was like, yeah, no, duh, you should be in New York. Actually, you should probably be in Paris. Like, duh.
Mm-hmm.
And what was hard about it was all the reasons in my mind that said, no, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was practicing these modalities and just going through my process, there was a trip I took to New York at the end of July 2023. And by the end of those, say, 4 days, I knew, and I finally had like wrestled my monkey linear mind into believing that it was right for me to move back to New York. This was bananas. Okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
as a thing to do, this was bananas. Like given the life that had been set up, like this was bananas.
Mm-hmm. Did people think you were crazy? Did you think you were crazy? I mean,
I mean, I thought I was crazy, but it was kind of like the scale of thinking I was crazy. And this, by the way, this is literally like how to start learning how to be in alignment with yourself 101. It's like scale of I think I'm actually insane for thinking this is right for me versus like knowing that this is right for me. You might still think you're insane that the thing is right for you, but you decide to honor the thing that's right for you over the conversation that it's insane.
that is a really incredible juncture. And I will say, I just want to share my own small window with this. It wasn't small at the time, but it's the Anais Nin moment where the risk to stay small is is tougher than the risk to grow. It's, the risk to grow has to feel much more compelling. And in my astrological journey, I was not raised to be an astrologer, to say the least. And it came to a place where it was like, I don't care what people think. I need to do this. And it feels, especially for a lot of women, especially the older generations, oh, you can't do something because it's about you or for you. You have to conform. And there was this juncture where it was like, I'm going to wilt and die. So that is what I'm hearing you talk about. It's like, I don't care if people think I'm crazy. I need to do this.
Yes. And I think that, you know, what I'm finding is I'm starting to build more and more proof points of when I've got those scales, like, wow, this is crazy, but I know this is right for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm practicing prioritizing. This is what's right for me. This is what's right for me. This is what's right for me. It's very scary, but the more I do it and the more good results I get from that, which doesn't always mean it's comfortable at
Mm-hmm.
first, or it starts to build my trust. And so to just flesh out the New York example, because I think this is really powerful, is,
Yes.
you know, this was the first time that I let the scales tip in this is what's right for me. And it was the first time that I then experienced the power that can come when you do what's right for you. So, what that looked like is I landed at Miami International Airport at midnight on Sunday. So, Sunday going into Monday. Um, by the following Thursday, I had my lease in hand for my New York City apartment.
The universe conspiring to make manifest the direction you're to go.
And for those who might not have the frame of reference, again, this is not like an ego thing. This is literally just like
Right.
the power of what can happen. Beat the New York City housing market from 3,000 miles away while working full time. And I was actually doing my motorcycle course training at the same time. Like it literally, I was like bending time and space. And that that was the watershed moment. And I moved back to New York, and there were just more and more junctures like that I kept facing, which, remember, this is all in service of how do I bring cool and thoughtful into the world as my fullest expression in terms of my time, in terms of my life, in terms of my career, in terms of my community, in terms of like what I'm here to do. And, there were several other inflection points that just like kept flowing from that and that continue to flow from that. And so, what I often say right now is that my top priority is my awareness and being present, because I've had enough experiences to know that the thing, whatever the thing is that I'm looking to do or create, it can happen in an instant. It can happen in 24 hours. It can happen. It is not a function of time. Like if I'm clear and aligned, things happen like that. They can. And so much of what I am investing in right now is that awareness, because it's like that creates the conditions for things to happen.
Blossom, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
my guest is Kerrin, Kerrin Smith. She is art director, photographer, and founder of Cool and Thoughtful magazine. You can find her on Instagram by Cool and Thoughtful, BY Cool and Thoughtful, or on her website, coolandthoughtful.com. We are talking about the journey of personal and spiritual development. And wow. So where do we go from here? I mean, it's interesting you talking about the different modalities, because Kabbalah has to be the oldest. I mean, that's the roadmap. It's the tree of life that astrology is based on, the Sephiroth. And then overlaying that is a very new modality, human design, which was given to a man, in the 70s?
sounds right.
Yeah. He went on vacation in the Canary Islands or the Azores, and he downloaded, talk about coming from left field and spiritual and personal development. It was like, wow. So how do you feel like you integrate these or, work with them?
Yeah. So I'd love to share a little bit about my experience with Kabbalah, and then would love to just offer some ways, sort of building on what I've learned works for me. Would love to offer some ways that people can start to tap into their own journey, and I can share some of my routines and things that I do that people might find their own version of. Because I think one thing, Hilary, that I'm just discovering is that as I discover what it is to live in alignment with oneself, which is when I say that, what I really mean is what it is to live life tipping the scale, into doing what is right for you versus what you think is crazy,
right,
or just thinking that that's crazy. I'm really finding how passionate I am about helping people live their lives that way. And so it's no coincidence then that the upcoming issue number 4 of Cool and Thoughtful is the alignment issue. So with that, I'd say, to just complete the chronology of this 2023 journey, Steph is the one who introduced me to Kabbalah, Steph Lockhart.
Okay.
And what I found is that, having moved back to New York, there were a couple other accelerating moments that were sort of really pushing me through this journey of living life that much closer to the complete cool and thoughtful design. And I was still having a hard time integrating the worlds of the subconscious and these modalities that seemed kind of far out, but were working and resonating with more of an ethic of like, create it, do it. If it doesn't feel right, who cares? Keep like I was having a really hard time because there were elements of like, okay, ignore thoughts and feelings that were working really well for me. So I was not experiencing a lot of skill with like I felt like I didn't have a lot of distinction around how do I know which thoughts to listen to versus which thoughts to ignore? Like, how do I know which feelings to pay attention to and which feelings to ignore? Like, I'd kind of gone this pendulum swing from like, ignore all thoughts and feelings to like, listen to all thoughts and feelings. And like, either is quite right, but I don't know. I don't really know how to make sense of each yet.
Discernment.
Exactly. And so Kabbalah for me was the modality through which I started to get some discernment. And the teacher that I just love, David Guillaume, I listened to an episode of him on Jenna Zoe's podcast. So Jenna Zoe is the human design teacher that I pay attention to. And what I was really getting from Kabbalah is like, you make a couple of things. One, reactivity and like being reactive to something, like having an emotional reaction, feeling angry, feeling triggered, like that is a great sign. That means that you have touched on something that there is for you to transcend, develop, pay attention to, like that whole sort of harkening back to what I discovered with Pema Chodron around like, oh, wow, you can have a reaction. Like that doesn't have to be your world. What I was getting in Kabbalah is not only does the reaction not have to be your world, it's actually a great thing. Like you can actually relate to reactivity as a great thing. Similarly, you can relate to pain or like painful experiences as a great thing because on the other side of that is some growth, is some transcendence, is something that you need to settle in this life or a past life. And so what I've been, Kabbalah really has introduced me to a discipline of relating to pain as a good thing. So it's like, how quickly can I turn this anxious experience into like, yes, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be, rather than freaking out about being anxious or worried or reactive. So there's something there that Kabbalah really offered me. It also helped me see that it's not all or nothing. So it's not, if I have an intention to manifest something, like to create something, go at it with all my might. Like, yes, go at it and realize there's something else at work.
Yes.
Like, I have everything to do with it and I've got nothing to do with it. So, like,
that's huge. That moment's huge.
That's huge. And so it's kind of like, okay, as David will say, give it maximum effort. Maximum effort, realizing that whatever happens, whatever I do or don't do is right. It is right for where I am in my development, karmically, spiritually. So what I say to myself and to others is like, as long as you are literally giving it your absolute best shot, whatever that looks like, which by the way is not the same as like, give it 16 hours of your day. Okay. Sometimes that's what it looks like.
Truth.
But it's like, whatever your best effort is, you give it your best effort, it's going to land exactly where it needs to land. And there was something about that, like, that really changed how I was thinking about cause and effect. It wasn't like my effort creates this linear result, or like my lack of effort creates this linear result. Rather, it's like my effort will create whatever result is appropriate. And that will then lead to the next series of experiences and the next series of actions. And some of those I might be able to see, a lot of those I can't see, but that's okay. Just keep doing the best I can.
Right, right.
And I think that was really freeing for me, because it, in a certain sense, it gave me permission to like play piano with my dominant hand, which is give maximum effort, like go at it. Like I'm a force of nature, like go at it.
Mm-hmm.
But it also released me of a lot of the like linear pressure and consternation of, and that needs to create X result.
And it needs to look, as you said, in a certain way, 16 hours, driving. One of my favorite quotations is the universe doesn't say no, it says not now, or we have something better in mind for you.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think that was really so that like reframing the relationship between effort and results, and then reframing how to relate to pain and discomfort and unpleasant emotions. Those two elements of Kabbalah really transformed the game for me. And they I feel like with that sensibility, I felt like I could then like play the whole range of piano to go with that metaphor. Like I felt like I had permission then to swing way out in terms of the subconscious mind, like practicing faith, like energy work that felt very much of that domain. And I also felt like I had permission to swing way out and like use all my drive and intentionality. And so I continue to just practice. It's kind of like feeling in the dark. It's like, okay, what works? Like, what does life have to show me? And
and not being afraid necessarily of the dark, or if you are afraid, momentarily acknowledging that it's okay to have a moment of, I don't know what I'm doing here. I am afraid.
Totally. And I have to say, like, the game is how quickly can you catch that thought as a thought, and like how quickly, I'll speak for myself, like how quickly can I take a moment of pain and actually relate to it in the ways that I just described.
Right.
Sometimes I can do it in 60 seconds. Sometimes it's like a day or two.
And that's fine.
That's okay. It's not pleasant, let me tell you, but and this is where this gets to the point, Hilary. I really would like to share some modalities and practices. I can be very light touch with people, because this is why these practices matter, is to just reiterate what I said. It's like being a human is no freaking joke. Like
right.
it is hard. It is really hard. It is not a pleasant experience. I will speak very honestly. I woke up so anxious this morning. I was like, wow, I didn't even have this thought. I was just believing everything that I was thinking. And like somewhere in my mind, I was like, you should go get some sunshine. That's going to help you like think a little bit more clearly. Like get out the door, because I was so stuck in like all the things I was afraid of and anxious about. It's what it is to be a human. And so in terms of modalities, what I would say overall, because one of the core principles of how I approach life and of everything that I do with Cool and Thoughtful is I am very specific about the how and am generally agnostic about the what. So, Cool and Thoughtful, what you will read about is ways of being, ways of interacting, values that you can bring into your life, examples of what that can look like, but you will not find like, here's what you should do. Or if there is a recommendation over what you should do, it's contextualized as an example of the greater principle that you can bring into your own life and find what works for you. So with that, there are, I'd say the biggest thing that I would advise people to do or offer to people is that if there is anything that you have heard of or that is catching your interest in the world of personal development, whether it is something you have seen on social media, something you have heard in this conversation, a book you saw, if there's anything that has piqued your interest, like go for it. Like see what's there. Pull the
Right.
thread. See what you'll discover. Like
Right. Play, play.
play. Something's better than nothing. Right.
Experiment, be curious, wonder, approach it with wonder.
Totally. And then what I'd also offer is that I found that there are some elements of like cultivating consciousness that I think are tried and true. And I'll share what those are. And then sort of how one practices those in their life can be up to you. So, um, you know, something about getting present, something about like just being with the thoughts, letting them run, practicing not believing the thoughts. So meditation is the old, like kind of the oldest form of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that, meditation can literally be, and this is sometimes what it looks like for me, and for many years, this is what it looked like for me. Set the timer for 10 minutes, sit in silence, get up when the timer is done.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything profound happening? Nope. Did the thoughts stop? Nope. Was it comfortable? Nope. Did I sleep better because of it? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something about meditation. I have found that um, I am most reactive first thing in the morning. So what I've found is that my day will be better. I will be better. Every single person I interact with will be better. Whatever I do will be better throughout the day if I do what I need to do to get present in the morning. And like,
Mm-hmm.
so what that
Mm-hmm.
looks like is my alarm goes off on my phone. I turn off my alarm, but I do not look at my phone. And before going to bed the night before, I have turned off all notifications on my phone. So
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing coming in anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a new practice is Patrick recently sent me an album of affirmations from Deepak Chopra. And I am obsessed with these because they are 2 to 3 minute sound bites that offer a completely alternative way of thinking about anything. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I will usually press play on one of those as I get up, brush my teeth, make my coffee, because it's a way to like, let me hardwire over whatever this like gnarly conversation is that I'm waking up into. Maybe there's another way. And so I will listen to those as I make a coffee. And what I find for me is that having things in my coffee that support my nervous system, so things like ashwagandha, mixing my beloved Trader Joe's medium roast with some like adaptogen coffee,
Mm-hmm.
mixing cacao in it for magnesium, that is supportive for me. And I'm still not looking at my phone. And even though everything I'm describing, like the unadulterated version of this, can take the entire morning, there are ways to condense the essence of it down into whatever time I have. So I'm giving the like sort of the long form version.
Right. Right.
I then find that for me, I am not a homebody. I don't like being in the house. For me, rest is going for a walk, looking at all the graffiti and like all the old typefaces. Remember, I'm the founder of a magazine. I live
Right.
for typefaces and fonts. For me,
Right.
rest is not sitting on the couch. Like that is not rest for me. For me, rest is like totally zoning out and like looking at all the typefaces in Manhattan. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
with that in mind, like it's very important for me to think clearly to get out, like getting out of the house really helps me get present. So
Mm-hmm.
I get out with my coffee and I'm in the fresh air. And that's when I feel like I start to come to a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'll walk for, I'll walk around the block, have my coffee. And then, exercise and movement is a supportive practice.
Right. Right.
I think that's like a
Yeah.
general statement, whether that is like stretching for 5 minutes or like running for 90,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like for you can be different. I find that what's supportive for me is to then go run for 30 minutes. And I don't listen to anything. I don't bring my phone and, um, you know, let my brain do what it does and see what happens. I then will come back and another form of exercise has been really supportive for me is Pilates. And so what I do is I'll do my at-home Pilates while I listen to some content or teaching that is supportive for me. So what that's looked like recently is I did all my Kabbalah courses online while I was
Mm-hmm.
doing Pilates.
Mm-hmm.
So like I listened to all my Kabbalah courses while I was doing Pilates. Or I'll listen to, the human design podcast I really love. So I'll listen to Jen and Zoe.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll just listen to the affirmations and kind of let things gel. Or other mornings, I will go to yoga class, which is another modality that's very supportive for me.
Right.
My favorite joke is, wow, I really wish I didn't go to yoga today, said no one ever.
Seriously.
Anyways, and so what you're getting in everything that I'm describing is a blend of inducing alpha brain state, knowing oneself and your proclivities around lifestyle that help you be present and well, some sort of personal or spiritual development content.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, making design choices that take into account one's reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
So, to go backwards, design choices that take into account reactivity. I do not look at my phone until after the run because I know that like I will be reactive with whatever's coming in and how I will respond or the thoughts that go off in my head are just not how I truly want to respond. So the design choice that I put in place is I do not look at the phone until at least I get to the Pilates. I try not to write back until after. That's when
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the that if that was four, number three is knowing oneself and one's, or excuse me, I think number three was content, like actual like content. For me, it's been Kabbalah, human design. That's been the content that's really resonated with me, whether it's that or a podcast listening to Rick Rubin or some other podcast or another course, whatever that content is that is supportive to you, like something about personal development content or course or content is supportive. Number two, like knowing oneself and what works for you on a lifestyle dimension. This is a lot harder than it sounds.
It is. It is
hard. It's very, and I have just like such compassion for this process because, my own absence of knowing this led to just some very like hard daily experiences, nothing catastrophic, but kind of disorienting. And so even just knowing like, wow, I think clearly when I get out of the house, like that's such a blessing in my life to know that about myself. And
mm-hmm.
it's not like an obvious thing. And
Right.
cultivating a practice for yourself where I'm like, okay, what works for me in terms of how I live? That can be really supportive. And then the first one, alpha brain states. So literally there are four different speeds of brain waves. Usually we're at the fastest speed, which is the beta, and one click down from that is alpha. And that's the feeling you have when you feel like your mind goes quiet, or when you feel really peaceful after a workout or
Mm-hmm.
meditation. It can come in all forms. This also happens for me when I watch skateboarding. Like I love watching skateboarding.
That's
It's
adorable.
it's my favorite. I absolutely love it. I'll spare the details of that, but I noticed I was like, I actually get into alpha brain state when I watch skateboard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it doesn't have to be, right?
Right.
There are many,
Right.
it doesn't have to be sitting on the cushion. Um, but alpha brain states, I think, are like, and gosh, like maybe we can put together just a hit list of things to help people access alpha brain states, because that's what actually creates the ability for your brain to think and do something else. So that,
Yeah. Thank you. No, this is very helpful to walk listeners through an example of how to greet each day. And what I'm hearing is discipline, because it takes discipline to say, I am not, I mean, let's start with the number one. I'm not touching my phone until after a certain point. And there's also forgiveness if you divert from a certain practice, or you run into something comes up, and watching, it's really observation and witnessing the behavior, one's behavior, and judgment. And it's, reserving judgment in that, oh, you did something, that is off the grid or off the list. And just it takes a lot of discipline and self-forgiveness.
I found that Kabbalah has been very supportive for me in that one of the things that I learned through Kabbalah is like the way the opponent gets you is by having you beat up on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Beating up on yourself, which I am so good at. Like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's like a go-to. Um, that is a trick to keep you from developing.
Mm-hmm.
And I try as best I can to relate to it like that. And so, when I do beat up on myself, it's always like, okay, how quickly can I remember that, like, this is, there's nothing wrong with this? Like, the faster I can give it up, the faster we get back on the horse,
Right.
faster the horse goes.
Right. Right.
And that's hard. But I think the other thing too, Hilary, and this is very much like a Kerrin personal belief. Um, I really do believe that what's best for me is what's best for all involved. So let me explain that. Even just the practice of I'm not going to respond to the texts until I've done my ritual of coming down from reactivity. Whatever bad would happen by like not responding in time, missing something time sensitive, sure, that might have an impact. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that could be a really gnarly impact. And ultimately, I deeply believe it all comes down to one's way of being. How are you being in a situation? And no matter what the circumstances are, how you are being with others in the situation, your way of being is what shapes what you do, the actions you take, and the results that those actions create. And so, you know, coming down from reactivity is fundamentally taking care of my being so that regardless of what those texts say, I am being with that communication or being with that to do or being with that exchange in a way that is as present and as like positive and aligned with my values as I possibly can be. And if I am aligned in that way of being, then I really do trust that whatever I am saying from that place will be the best I can do and the best I can offer. And that will be better and more powerful. Like the good in that aligned, like principled way of being outweighs like there's some economics metaphor that's getting really jumbled in my brain. It's like the good
cost benefit.
Yes, exactly. It is it's the cost benefit. It's like the benefit of bringing that present principled way of being to whatever it is will outweigh any cost of like not responding fast enough.
Right.
Or if I'm responding in a fast way, but it's not present and aligned, and I know what I'm capable of in terms of interacting and solutions and possibilities when I am present and aligned, that is always going to create more good than the bad of the delay. And sometimes, like if I miss something, yeah, sometimes there's an impact. It's not to say it doesn't have an impact.
Right.
But it's inside of like A, pure intentions, and E, like being smart. So if I know that there's something that's going to have like needs time sensitive attention, well, set myself up to be responding in a way that worked for the timeliness of the situation. And ultimately, like getting to a point in myself where I really do have enough faith and confidence in my ways of being and navigating that I'm comfortable taking a bet on myself and like taking a bet on my way of being. And like that's probably the biggest victory in all of that, because regardless of where that leads me, you know, to continue to cultivate the like, yeah, I bet on me and I'll keep betting on me. Like that's what else do you want?
That's beautifully said. There's a lot to be said for when you're present and when you allow for being. It also is a co-collaboration for divine timing. And that's partnering and trusting with what we cannot see, feel. We can sort of feel it, but we can't see it. We can't touch it. We can't smell it. We can't maybe hear it. But it is essentially grace and trust that it all is working out according to a plan that is well beyond our imagination.
It's always very grounding to hear that.
My amazing guest, it's been an honor, a joy, and a pleasure to speak with you and hear you're definitely a thought leader of your generation, and to see where you're going to go on your journey and how you're going to be of service through Cool and Thoughtful and myriad other ways, I suspect. Kerrin Smith, Kerrin Smith. She is art director, photographer, and founder of Cool and Thoughtful. It's a magazine, but it's also lifestyle and development, personal development, spiritual development. You can find her at By Cool and Thoughtful on Instagram. So BY Cool and Thoughtful on Instagram, as well as her website, coolandthoughtful.com. That brings us to the end of this episode of Mystical Messages. To learn more about my work or to book a session with me, please visit hilaryharley.com. If you would like to read my monthly forecast, to check dates of planetary events and cycles, you may find the full written transcript for all astrology episodes on my website. Thank you so much for listening today. Please join me again in 2 weeks when I will bring you my astrology forecast for the upcoming month. I wish you many blessings as you journey forward.